So I'm just going to introduce Jack Lawlor, who is on our Foreign Policy Working Group and an active member of Kappa, and also with the Buddhist Peace Fellowship. This is sort of a joint production of Chicago Area Peace Action, the Foreign Policy Working Group at Chicago Area Peace Action, and the Buddhist Peace Fellowship. So thanks so much for coming, and I'll give you Jack Lawlor.
It's really good to see everybody, even though a number of us saw each other as recently as Sunday. But I'm saying that because as someone who's been trying my best to read up on this as a layperson, it's really good to have discussions with other people. You can't keep reading in isolation. And the time is now to start getting moving on some things, because I don't think any nation can afford what's up ahead in terms of an arms race. So I've given some talks on this in the last year, but I'd like to kind of leap into what's foremost on my mind, and very possibly yours, about recent news. The one that's all over the news right now, and my first point, of course, is the failure of the U.S. and Russia to extend the New START treaty before it expires next month. This is the agreement that's been credited with successfully reducing the number of nuclear weapons kept by the U.S. and Russia. And if this understanding breaks down, we'll be in a woefully expensive arms race that further cripples our government's ability to help people with food assistance and badly needed health care and any number of other things. I'll talk a little bit about these points later. The second thing that's been troubling me, and possibly you, and it came up in the movie House of Dynamite we saw last week, has to do with how much time the president or the premier of Russia would have to react to a nuclear threat. In the movie, it's posited as 19 minutes, and that's been about the number they've been using for years. But several nations, including the U.S., have been pursuing the development of hypersonic missiles. Both Russia and China are far along with these, and they're like cruise missiles. They fly at relatively low altitudes. They can zigzag and are maneuverable all over the place. But they travel at Mach 7 or Mach 8. That's 7 or 8 times the speed of sound. They can be very accurate, and it's difficult to intercept them with anything like our current defensive missile strategy. In short, these missiles enable an enemy to be hit before it realizes in any way, shape, or form what's coming. I roughly estimate that the amount of time provided the president of House of Dynamite would probably be cut in half if the hypersonic missile was launched from either a coastal submarine or a coastal squadron of long-range bombers. Bear in mind that these are capable of carrying nuclear weapons as well as being attached to aircraft and submarines. Traditional intercontinental missiles, by comparison, are also hypersonic, so don't get misled in this discussion. They take a 30-minute journey into space before coming down at a very high speed. But their trajectory is predictable. And as demonstrated in the movie, there might be a couple opportunities with different defense systems to try to shoot a couple of them down. Of course, that may not work if there's a swarm of them. So the hypersonic missile is troubling to me. It makes the hair trigger decision of the president or the premier even worse. And again, the expense is just unbelievable. Putin has already twice used his Oreshnik hypersonic missile against Ukraine. The first did not contain a warhead. It was just for drama, I think. The second one, which landed partially within 40 miles of the Polish NATO border, had conventional warheads. By the way, hypersonics are capable of having MIRV warheads. Remember MIRV from the 60s and 70s where there's a multiple warhead inside the missile? They're capable of that as well. The third thing that's troubling to me is President Trump's really vague statements about how other countries are violating nuclear test treaties, and therefore we're going to resume testing. And nobody knew what he really meant. Did he mean these hypersonics? Or does he mean the atmospheric nuclear testing that was so troubling to everybody in the 60s? And the White House has resisted any effort to clarify. And that, of course, is the president's style, to keep everyone off base. And this, of course, has triggered fears in the peace and nuclear disarmament communities that multiple countries might start atmospheric nuclear testing at great cost to the environment. And again, to the economies of these countries. So it would be a great leap backward to open the door to atmospheric nuclear testing. The 1963 Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty has directly or indirectly prevented atmospheric testing for all these decades. So let's not go backwards. The fourth thing troubling me as I join you tonight is a growing concern about the militarization and weaponization of outer space, particularly in low Earth orbits, where the world's key communications and surveillance satellites are located. Earth-to-Earth and space-to-space weapon systems are being developed and tested by several countries. The Russians tested one a few years ago that scattered further debris all over the low Earth orbit, increasing the danger to communications satellites, the International Space Station, etc. A real danger is that anti-satellite weaponry could wipe out or blind the surveillance and communications satellites of other countries or other nuclear powers, creating the kind of panic you saw in that movie where they couldn't discern where the missile came from. And panic could easily resort in the misuse of nuclear weaponry. There is a UN office called the Office for Disarmament Affairs that is attempting to build a consensus on preventing the militarization of space. There's a treaty that bans nuclear weapons in space, but not conventional weapons in space. So in summary, there's a lot of evidence that we're on the brink of a major new arms race in nuclear weapons. How in the world did we get to this point? I mean, we've seen that the New START treaty was going to expire in February. How did this happen? I think it's helpful for us as lay people to dig a little bit more into the history. And for me, at the top of the list, and this is happening to us in all kinds of ways in this era, we're getting numbed. We're getting dumbed down. The great thing about House of Dynamite is it is using the arts to put these issues back on the table. But for me, my House of Dynamite was when in high school, probably like you, for summer reading, I was assigned to book Hiroshima. And that had the impact on me that I think watching this movie has on a lot of other people. You may recall that a very young American journalist, John Hersey, was one of the first, not the first, but one of the first journalists to enter Hiroshima after the war. And unlike the movie Oppenheimer, and I think there's supposed to be a sequel to this, to Oppenheimer that does this, Hersey's book just concentrated on the effect of the bomb on 6 people. And it does so in a way that just burns through your heart. And for me, coming from a conservative parochial background, it was the first time I began to question the workings of government. makes you kind of wish more people were watching House of Dynamite, more people were reading Hiroshima, that people in music and the other arts, as well as movies, were doing more to raise this up, because this is the ultimate existential issue, isn't it? And I think the first comment we heard on Sunday after the film was, wouldn't we be in pretty bad shape if the U.S. president wasn't Idris Elba, the actor who played the president in the movie, but our current president? And isn't that the truth? How many good presidents have we had in recent years? We need more. I wish we could look back to the time I read Hiroshima back in 1965 and see what President Obama would call an arc of progress and what's been happening. But I'm afraid I don't see that, and I wonder if you do. I see things going in the wrong directions. Let me mention a few things. I've mentioned the START Treaty. That expires February 25th. Russia has suspended its participation but not withdrawn. It's opened the door to try to get things going again. We need to try to keep this treaty renewed in some fashion. It was successful. It reduced the number of U.S. and Russian nuclear weapons from 50,000 to, and the numbers change on this, but if you look at deployed warheads, about 1,700 each, a pretty close parity. If New START is not renewed, and if China is not involved, the U.S. may feel compelled to start exceeding New START limits due to China's nuclear buildup. Both the U.S. and Russia have walked away from the 1987 INF Treaty, which sought to eliminate intermediate-range nuclear weapons, which, by the way, would include the hypersonics, which currently have a range of about 3,000 miles. And just to put this all in perspective, China has more than doubled its nuclear arsenal from 200 warheads in 2010 to an estimated 600 today. And the Pentagon estimates that that number may grow to 1,500 this year. That's the first piece of background. New START is really important. If we, as a nuclear movement, want to get some low-hanging fruit, let's do something with our Congress, something with our State Department, something with the UN to try to save this puppy, because it's so critical. Secondly, the number of nuclear-equipped nations has now grown to 9. Estimated to have stockpiled 13,000 of them. I don't know if that figure is deployable or just a round number. Third, there have been lots of UN resolutions and treaties, such as the heroic 2022 Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in the UN, which pledges all the many, many signatories to abolish nuclear weapons. This is really an admirable effort. The group, as David pointed out on Sunday, that pushed this so hard and achieved it, won the Nobel Prize. But the 9 nations that possess the nuclear weapons won't touch it. There's an earlier treaty on non-proliferation of nuclear weapons that has helped limit the number of states possessing nuclear weapons. But this success may soon end if, one, Iran and other countries vigorously proceed to obtain a bomb in the wake of the U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. That may push them. The regime is very teetering right now, but one of the things that keeps a despotic regime in place is having nuclear weapons, a la North Korea. Secondly, the 1970 treaty succeeded in many things, but now in the wake of fears about the reliability of U.S. foreign policy and the reliability of the U.S. nuclear shield that a lot of countries thought they were enjoying, countries may change their mind and decide, if you're the United Kingdom or France, you need to start building up because America may not be there. Also, the recent failure of Russia and the United States to observe and honor the boundaries of Ukraine and Venezuela will lead smaller countries to obtain the bomb. The fourth thing in our history that I'd like to point out is that U.S. peace and justice groups have been pushing for the U.S. to forego, as an example, the first use of nuclear weapons. But every legislative resolution gets stalled in our toxically divided Congress, which is preoccupied with other things. The next item is how the peace groups have tried but failed to regulate the U.S. President's sole authority to launch nuclear weapons. All that's done in a crisis is to verify that this person before you, him or her, is indeed the President of the United States. Once they do that, and I don't know if they do it through eye identification or fingerprinting or both, the President has the sole authority to launch. Now, there are problems with opening that up to, at least consulting with key cabinet members or consulting with key members of Congress. But as we learned from the movie, you may have 19 minutes to do it. And people are commuting, they're taking their children to events when they have a day off from school. Senator Tim Kaine brought this to a vote in front of the Senate within the last year, and it was defeated in a 53-47 vote. But you might view that as helpful. If we can get a victory somewhere, let's say on the New START Treaty, and start bringing other things to people's attention, with the current president, wouldn't you want to try to start limiting their authority? So as you can glean, a new incredibly costly arms race may begin imminently. The cost to refurbish the existing land-based missile system, they call it the Sentinel system, the ones up there in the silos in Montana and the Dakotas, has escalated from $78 billion to $140.9 billion. None of the estimates are ever anywhere near what was promised.
Are you saying that's the number of silos there are?
No, that's
No,
the
that's
number.
the cost of refurbishing the system.
Oh.
Apparently these weapons will decay, and the silos themselves are decaying, and the equipment is antiquated, so they're really redoing the whole thing. And this was under President Obama. And the total cost for that has been estimated to be $756 billion. The total cost of all nuclear refurbishment has been estimated to be $756 billion between 2023 and 2026. Let's add something to that, which is huge and maybe a total waste of money. Do you remember President Reagan and Star Wars, the SDI? He just said the U.S. was going to proceed with this missile defense system. And the Russians took him seriously, and they started putting all kinds of resources into it. And some people attribute the fall of the Soviet Union to the economic collapse of the government being able to spend so much on all these weapons programs. President Trump mumbled that he would like to create not just an Iron Dome, which Israel enjoyed in the recent conflict, but a Golden Dome. Of course it would be golden. To defend the U.S. against intercontinental ballistic missiles, and I don't know if he had hypersonics in mind. But the testing that's been done of these missile systems for defense under highly controlled circumstances only have that 60% success rate that was mentioned in House of Dynamite. And if you are dealing with either uncontrolled conditions where you don't really know where things are going to be launched from, or the attack as a swarm, a combination of various missiles and perhaps drones. Think of what it would cost to get a Golden Dome in place that would knock every one of those down. It isn't possible.
The difference between Iron Dome and Golden Dome?
Iron Dome already exists, and it protects Israel. It's the Patriot missile system and some others. Golden Dome does not exist, and the president is going to pursue it. I don't know what's in the budget for that, but it's massively expensive and it probably won't work. So what can we do as citizens? I suggest that the public doesn't have this in its upper mind. We're too entertained by culture wars or too distracted with our family budget. There's just more than the nonprofit sector can handle as the defender of democracy. We have to take over the wheels of government ourselves. So I would suggest that we never assume that the public, when they come to gather with us at Fountain Square or here or other places, understand much of this. And I think we have to find ways to use very plain language to make our point that we need to avoid future Hiroshimas and Nagasaki's. I think people can be encouraged to learn more about the situation. There's a lot available online. There's a wonderful magazine called Arms Control Today. If you get on the internet, you can spend all day surfing just to get yourself into the subject. There's some pending legislation that people are pushing. One is House Resolution 317, the so-called Back from the Brink resolution, which has got a menu of everything that I've mentioned, to extend New START, to avoid first use, to end the president's sole authority, and to maintain the nuclear test ban treaty. There's some recent bills that have been introduced, and with polite resolve, we can urge our Congress representatives to support two new bills, the Nuclear Testing Without Approval Act, H.R. 5951, and the Restrain Act, which bans nuclear tests and restricts their funding. But above all, I think we need to talk to each other. We need to get our neighbors excited. We need to join groups like Kappa and similar groups that are national in scope, and start working together after discussing these things. I have found that it's more of a relief to get active than to just read the New York Times and all day long about these subjects. The frustration is less. Another thing, and Charles and I were talking about this briefly, is to start on a grassroots to grassroots basis, try to find allies in some of these other countries I've been mentioning. Kappa has already done that by talking to some like-minded people from South Korea, where their immediate focus is different. I'm sure they would be an ally. And there are any number of organizations that aspire to have a nuclear international reach, but I'm sure they could use help. So let's ponder all this together. Let's have the curiosity of a young John Hersey. Let's not assume somebody else is taking care of this, and work together as friends. Thank you.
So I'll welcome you again. Good evening, right? Thanks for taking the time to join Jack and I in a conversation. To understand and recognize the disturbing and growing danger represented by the pending expiration of the last, put that in all caps, the last remaining nuclear arms control treaty between the two most prolific possessors of these weapons of mass destruction. Equally disturbing, there are zero, and I mean zero, active negotiations for what might replace New START, and zero active negotiations with the People's Republic of China, with whom we have an extraordinarily limited history of diplomacy, right? I mean, we put a hotline in right after the Cuban Missile Crisis. The United States and Russia have understood the tragic power that these weapons contain, and were practiced at those negotiations. We do not have that relationship with China. And China, understandably, after more than 60 years, China got their nuclear capability in 1963. More than 60 years of not engaging in a nuclear arms race, are now worried enough about the behaviors of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin that they're now embarked on what Jack mentioned, a decade-long plan to achieve some sort of parity in the madness. What rational head of state would not be worried hearing the irresponsible rhetoric and actions of the two world leaders that control nearly 90% of the world's nuclear weapons? In less than 2 weeks, we're going to get an idea of how worried we all ought to be. On January 27th, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists will announce the reset of the infamous doomsday clock. Created in 1947 by Manhattan Project scientists, including Albert Einstein and J. Robert Oppenheimer, to warn of the danger of these arsenals. The initial setting of this iconic symbol was 7 minutes to midnight. And through the years, and arms control treaties and cooperation, it moved back as far as 17 minutes to midnight. In 1991, following the passage of the original Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, the precursor to New START, known by the acronym START, S-T-A-R-T. Here it's worth mentioning, in case anyone is not fully aware, that the United States is the only nation to have used a nuclear weapon on another country in armed combat. This might be more of a revelation to people under 30 or under 50 years old, but it bears mentioning as a reminder. At the end of World War II, where there's much debate over the necessity of those bombings, particularly the Nagasaki bombing, there is no debate that the effects of those two bombings on August 6th and August 9th, 1945, were so singularly horrific that the world's conscience has not afforded the space for another use of these diabolical weapons since. Until now. Now we enter a world that no longer seeks security through cooperation and understanding. Now we see rhetoric and behaviors reminiscent of the world order prior to World War I, when the struggle for access to land, human resources, and mineral resources determined the world order and great powers' behavior. When what mattered, as Stephen Miller so recently reminded us in his horrific interview with Jake Tapper at CNN, what will matter again now in the New World Order are that we should be governed again by strength, governed by power, governed by force, rather than what Stephen Miller called the niceties, what we might call sanity and loving our children. These are indeed worrisome words and worrisome times. Not that we've not had dangerous scenarios in the past. The Korean War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the 1973 Arab-Israeli War, to name just a few. But in each of these instances, those who controlled the mechanisms of the end of civilization prevailed over chaos through communication, careful diplomacy, and sane, rational thinking. Over the past 80 years, we've been lulled into a false sense of security, believing that such clear communication, careful diplomacy, and sane, rational thinking will always come to the fore and save mankind from its worst instincts. I'm here today to say loud and clear, this is nothing more than magical thinking. And anyone who chooses to ignore the dire warning signs are either closing their eyes to a situation they cannot rationally acknowledge, or they're blissfully or foolishly unaware of the gathering storm. I'll take us on a little trip through recent history for a moment. Let's begin only 62 years ago on June 10th, 1963, on the campus of American University, when then President John F. Kennedy delivered what has become known as the peace speech at the height of the Cold War. The rhetoric was powerful, but more important, The actions that followed were inspiring. The United States would unilaterally stop all nuclear testing and pledge not to resume if no other nation did so. And the Limited Test Ban Treaty was signed less than 60 days after that speech, and is largely credited as being the first step toward a global non-proliferation treaty, which became a reality in 1968, opened for signature, and found full force of international law in 1970. The Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1970 is still the bedrock nuclear arms control treaty, even though we really haven't lived up to our end of it. Moving from 1963 to 1970, when the NPT, as it's known, came into force, it represented a grand bargain. The non-nuclear weapons nations would agree to not develop these weapons of horrific mass destruction, and the then 5 nuclear-armed states in turn, under Article 6 of the treaty, would agree, I'm going to quote directly from the treaty, would agree to pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to cessation of the nuclear arms race at an early date and to nuclear disarmament. That's the part we haven't lived up to. While the rest of the world largely held up their end of the bargain, with the fervent hope that nuclear weapons owning states would hold up their end, we failed, and largely failed humanity. To be clear, we continued the empty rhetorical service to the safety and security of a world without nuclear weapons, but tragically did not back that rhetoric up with action. Continuing on our historical journey, we jump ahead to Prague, April 2009, when the newly elected President Barack Obama promised, and I'll quote this also, "So today, I state clearly and with conviction America's commitment to seek the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons." Such great hope. Alas, a short 2 years later, in 2010, the same president signed into law what Jack referred to, a full and complete nuclear modernization program committing $1.5 trillion over 30 years to a complete overhaul of the entire nuclear weapons architecture. This boondoggle has ensured that the U.S. would not and will not lead on the disarmament obligations all signatories to the treaty claim to undertake under Article 6. Finally, in one more attempt to position the U.S. as the keeper of the nuclear disarmament flame, in 2020, then-candidate Joe Biden spoke repeatedly on the campaign trail, stating that the sole purpose of our nuclear arsenal will be deterrence, and deterrence only, which would be effectively a no-first-use policy. With the clear understanding that were he to be elected president, the United States would adopt a no-first-use policy, making good on that promise on the campaign trail, and he promptly never spoke of it again after being inaugurated into office. So now we come full circle to this moment. Martin Luther King recognized more than 60 years ago that our scientific power has outrun our spiritual power. Indeed, with the massive growth of scientific knowledge and lightning-fast global communication systems, it's no longer possible to keep nuclear weapons technology and the accompanying scientific knowledge bottled up to be dispensed only to whosoever we see fit to possess it. That ship has sailed. And so we've become, in King's words, and I'll quote Martin Luther King, a nation of guided missiles and misguided men. And we have very little left to bargain with, save our rapidly vanishing moral authority. Our rapidly vanishing moral authority. I wrote those words 6 months ago. I don't know that there's any moral authority left in the United States of America. It was rapidly vanishing 6 months ago. It may have completely disappeared by now. But with the current administration's fixation on demanding that the industrialized nations of the world arm themselves to the teeth with U.S.-made weapons and weapons systems, we now face the very real nightmare of at least a dozen, and possibly more, nuclear-armed nations, as Jack alluded to, in the very near future. In the last year of his life, an American hero, Daniel Ellsberg, said on more than one occasion, the possibility of a nuclear detonation by design, miscalculation, or accident is not 0%. It's not even close to 0%. And we know that the universal laws of physics and mathematics tell us that anything that is not a mathematical impossibility is a mathematical inevitability. Our 80-year history of nuclear weapons possession is replete with example after example of misunderstandings, accidents, and Cold War fear where we just barely escaped a major exchange of nuclear weapons. And now we increase the opportunities for misjudgment by magnitudes with a new nuclear arms race with China. Adding to that risk are more nations, Iran, South Korea, Japan, Saudi Arabia, all exploring the development of their own arsenals. All nations with whom we've had limited history of arms control treaties and negotiations. By a stroke of luck, or the right person being in a position to exercise proper judgment in the moment, like the Soviet colonel so many years ago, or by cooler heads at the top, restraining their initial instinct, we've avoided the apocalypse. But that should not and cannot be counted on to last forever. I took my degree from the University of Nevada in Las Vegas, and I took a lot of courses in mathematics of casino games. So I have to tell you, I know a little bit about winning streaks. They don't last forever. It's a mathematical impossibility. We have been the beneficiaries of a fantastically long winning streak with respect to nuclear weapons. It will not last forever. If we continue to add bullets to the chamber of the revolver that we hold to our heads and the heads of the world population in this lunatic game of nuclear Russian roulette, our luck will run out, and we won't get a second chance to get this right. In the opening of the 2003 movie, The Fog of War, which if you haven't seen it, you should watch. A little snoozy in the middle, but the opening is great, and it's McNamara's apology for Vietnam. But McNamara says in the opening voiceover of that movie, the conventional wisdom in warfare, right, that's the defense secretary under JFK, and the whiz kid at Ford. The conventional wisdom in warfare is, don't make the same mistake twice. Learn from your mistakes. But there will be no learning period with nuclear weapons. You make one mistake, and you're going to destroy nations. And now we know about nuclear winter, which wasn't understood in the 60s, that will destroy more than just the belligerent participants, will functionally obliterate human civilization across the planet. Someone asked Daniel Ellsberg about 6 months before he died in a meeting. He said, well, so if there's a major exchange of nuclear weapons, now we understand nuclear winter, is that going to destroy all life on the planet? And Ellsberg kind of half smiled and he says, oh no, not all life, just 85 or 90%. Anyway, and we won't get a second chance. In this historic moment, it's incumbent on the United States as the leading possessor of nuclear weapons to summon the moral authority and the political will to stand before the world and humbly say, mea culpa, mea culpa. We are now morally required to finally act under our obligation to the grand bargain that was and is the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We must commit to no longer preach temperance from a bar stool. If we are asking South Korea, Japan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and other non-nuclear weapon states to hold off on developing their own nuclear arsenals, then we must be prepared as we were in 1963, to lead by example. If we're unable to do so, we will fall victim to, as Martin Luther King reminded us in New York City in 1967, a year to the day before his tragic assassination, and 1 year before the Non-Proliferation Treaty entered into force. If we do not act, King said that day, we shall surely be dragged down the long, dark, and shameful corridors of time, reserved for those who possess power without compassion, might without morality, and strength without sight. The prophet. I'll close by paraphrasing the first century sage Hillel the Elder. If not us, who? If not now, when? Let us hope that our children, our children's children, will live to see the answer to that ancient philosophical question. Should they not, it will need to be answered 1,000 years or more from now by the few thousand descendants of the unfortunate survivors of the inevitable nuclear holocaust as they attempt to rebuild the shattered fragments of the global society. I really wanted to end this on a high note. Sorry to be so doom and gloomy. But it is doom and gloomy. What I didn't say in this talk, and that Jack referred to, there are ways for the United States to stand up and act unilaterally. The easiest thing to do would be to get on the world stage and say, we are going to sign the treaty on TPNW, the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It has 98 states, parties, and 135 signatories. There's about 190 countries in the world. Were the United States to do that, it has the possibility of having the exact same impact that Jack Kennedy had when he unilaterally stopped testing of nuclear weapons. We can do this. It just requires the political will and the moral character.